Welcome to ladies class. Thanks everybody for being here. We are continuing our work through the Portrait of God, the book that we've been studying. And we're going to pick up back in chapter 10. We didn't quite finish all of chapter 10 last week, so just a few notes again from chapter 10, and then we'll get through chapter 11 today. At least that's my plan. You may remember that we left last time talking about Rahab, and we read several passages about Rahab. And the thing that we most, where we left off was that Rahab ended up as a Gentile woman who really didn't have a good start in life, right? She was a harlot and she was a Canaanite. And she, even in her act of faith, she sinned by lying. But she was still commended for her actions of faith in the New Testament. But she eventually married into the tribe of Judah, we learned, lived in Israel. And so we can perhaps assume from that that she at least learned about the God of the Bible, and hopefully she was faithful for the rest of her life. But she ended up being in the lineage of Jesus by that marriage. And so that's a very cool thing about, God recognized her faith and blessed her as part of the seed promise. So we talked a little bit last time about the land promise, which was when God in Genesis chapter 12 told Abraham, he actually made three promises, right? The land, the seed, and your family will be multiplied. And so, and this was at a time, of course, when he didn't have any children. And so we talked about the land promise. They were, the Israelites went in and took the land of Canaan. They did not utterly destroy the Canaanites, and that was their downfall. So they struggled to be faithful all of those years. And now we'll talk a little bit about Ruth. So Ruth lived during the time of the Judges. And Ruth, what country were we in when Ruth opens? You all know this. Moab. Okay, so tell me about Moab. What do you know about Moab? Again, faithful to the Lord, not faithful to the Lord?
They were idol worshipers.
Yes, idol worshipers. And in fact, where did Moab get its start? Does anybody remember there's a little note. Yes, Lot's daughter. So remember, Lot was rescued. That word comes up a lot in this book. Lot was rescued out of Sodom. And in fact, the text says that the angel took him by the hand and led him out. Yes. So, there's some implication there that maybe he was dragging his feet and wasn't sure he wanted to go. His wife looked back. And so here he is, he ends up kind of wandering through the hill country around Sodom after being rescued with his two daughters. And they end up, both of them decide, well, here we are in the mountains, what's going to become of us? We should have children by our father. And so they both trick him into sleeping with them. And their sons were, each of them bore a son. One's name was Ammon, and that's the father of the Ammonites, was a thorn in Israel's side the whole time. And the other son was named Moab, who is the father of the Moabites. So that they had an auspicious start, right? They're distant relatives, but not a very good start, and they were not faithful. So here's Ruth. Now, her the family that she was a part of, the father's name was Elimelech, and the mother's name was Naomi. They were a Jewish family. And they were living in the land of Moab, which is interesting because Moab is an enemy. Why were they in the land of Moab? What was going on?
But there was a famine going on in the land.
Yeah. So they were driven into a different land. And there's some discussions in the commentaries about, would a faithful family have willingly gone into Moab? I don't know. They were at least faithful enough that Naomi conveyed, or somebody, Naomi at least conveyed to Ruth and to the other daughter-in-law enough about God that Ruth wanted to stay with this God, right? So they were at least that faithful. So I know you all know what happens, but the father and the two brothers pass away, and Ruth, Naomi, and Orpah, the other sister, the other daughter-in-law, we're going to head back to Naomi's family. And Naomi compels them to please stay. I don't have anything for you. Now, legally, at this time, because they were married into this family, that was, they only really had options legally within that family. And so Naomi, you can hear this as Naomi saying, I'm too old to have any more sons. There's nothing I can do, there's nobody no younger son or anybody else I can offer you to be married to. Go and be free. She's releasing them from the family obligation. And so they all cry about it. One goes back, but Ruth says no. And there's a famous thing that she says that we've all studied.
Treat me not to
before, right?
leave.
Yes. Where you go, I will go.
Yes.
Your people. Yes, and your God will be my God. Most
God.
importantly, your God.
Your people shall be my people.
Right, you're reading it great.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's, we study that a lot about kind of commitment and, those two women kind of being faithful on their own, and how Ruth, even the book talks about it, Ruth is sort of this bright light in the time of the judges, and coming out of Moab of all places, right? Here's this faithful girl who isn't really interested in the next husband. She is more concerned about her spiritual condition, right? Which is a great thing to, you're ever teaching young girls, right? Talk about that. And in doing that, she was blessed with a husband. So here she is. She's following Naomi. Yeah, young girls, right? All the young girls. It's true, it works. I'm a testament. So, and Ruth is too. So, this episode here where Ruth is going to come back with Naomi, and it turns out Naomi has this distant relative. There were a few distant relatives back at her home. One refuses because he doesn't want to deal with, he's already married, and if he has this other wife, what am I going to do? So he decides to give Ruth to Boaz. And Boaz is what's called a near kinsman. So he would have been sort of next in line legally. What's that?
A redeemer.
A redeemer. Yes. So there's our little word redeemer. So he would have been the next in line legally to be a husband to Ruth. And Naomi kind of works out that's what happens. Well, this is really related to the seed promise, similar to the way Rahab was, right? Rahab ends up here in the line of Jesus Christ. And so does Ruth. And so we mentioned last time that they end up related. We don't know how much interaction they had. They were kind of one generation apart. But, here's Rahab and her husband, and their son's name is Boaz, this man Boaz. And now Boaz marries this Moabite woman, this Gentile woman, which is interesting, right? Because think about his mother. Where did his mother come from? Where did his mother come from? What town? Jericho. Yeah, she was from Jericho, this wicked city, or the first city to fall in the land of Canaan that they took back from the Canaanites. And so Boaz's mother also, we presume, became faithful after her life of not being faithful. And now he's married to a woman who also came out of Moab, but is now faithful. So maybe providence there. The book mentions that it's both faith and providence at work here, where the sort of rescue of Naomi and Ruth, and then the marriage, the redeemer, where Boaz sort of rescues her from a lonesome life. And then they have a son named Obed. Put it in your baby name book. and Obed has a son named Jesse, and Jesse has a son named David, and we know about him, right? We'll talk about him a little bit today. So in this way, both of those women became a critical part of the seed promise. So God is working out this seed promise in some unexpected ways, right? It's not exactly the way you might think the story would go. But yeah.
That's what I was gonna say. True examples of with God, all things are possible.
Yes.
Because when Ruth went with Naomi to her home, she didn't go expecting a husband.
Right.
Because
Right.
she knew about, the lineage and everything. But she loved Naomi that much that she was willing to sacrifice everything to be with her.
That's right. Yep. And
It shows too, we follow God, things are going to work out. And the other thing, I always think of is God always does all these great things with people. These are not stellar people to start out with. They are not, cream of the crop. They are people that are broken, downtrodden, the dregs of society.
Yeah.
And God still used them. So what makes you think he can't use you?
That's right.
Amen. So,
That's right.
And another part of that the strong faith that they have and trust in God. Because it's trust And the faith that they had in God, they allowed God to work in their lives and not take over and make decisions themselves.
Right, yes, which was a theme last time, right? Joshua was making decisions on his own, yeah. Yeah, it's also a lesson, I was thinking about this today, that these two women really probably would have been, I mean, I don't know that they would have gone so far as to shun them from society in the Israelite way of life, but they really wouldn't have been welcomed. They were Gentiles, first of all, and from Moab and a harlot. And so it's also a lesson in the change that happens as a result of faith. You can have, even we sing songs about it, the vilest of sinners, right? I was the vilest of sinners. And then God's salvation, even the vilest of sinners can save, right? And so God, through these women, he's not only showing his salvation, but also his purpose and with his promise. So,
And even with the people who were not Israelites, they wanted to take part in their religion. God didn't turn them away.
That's right.
He accepted them as long as they followed the patterns that they were supposed to follow.
That's right.
So
Yeah, that was
that's
always
perfect.
true, right?
Yeah, he never turned a soul away.
That's right.
Always welcome you in.
Yeah, yeah, he's gracious. We talked about that last time, right? The Lord is gracious. And he, can kind of what Stacy said. I think he can see,
Mhm.
of course he can see what we can't see even in ourselves about our potential, right? And he can see what people can do. And you think of someone like Saul, right? Here he is out persecuting, and God says, "Oh, I can use that skill." Right? Come on over here. If you're going to be zealous, let's be zealous in the right way. So God can see all those things
But
that we
that forced his people that were already his people, that forced them to take a big leap.
Yeah,
Faith.
that's right. Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, which is interesting, I think, when you think about Naomi, not to get too far into the weeds on the Ruth story, but Naomi, her sons married Moabite women, which could not have been in the plan, right? That was probably not the plan for a faithful Jewish family, but there they were, and they married, and
Well,
that's
they had to
also
marry, and who else was there around?
right. Yeah, here they were in Moab.
So maybe
Yeah.
the plan was for them to go there all along. That's my problem.
But think about it,
That's
neither
God's
one
plan,
of
for
them
sure.
had children.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, and they could both be freed legally to go back to their families. Yeah,
Exactly.
When you look at their lives, though, no, her only two sons, and the girls not having any children at all, that might not have been from
That's
God.
what I'm saying.
right. Yeah,
Because number one,
Hmm.
did they consult God before they made the move?
which you don't know, right? And that's the question. Like
You don't
taking your
know.
family into Moab, like
Yeah, yeah. I would
Not
think if
advisable.
you want to ask the Lord, you ask him to lead the way,
right.
and show you the way or
Mhm.
something, rather than just automatically assume, well, we'll go over here.
Yeah,
Like, unlike with Joseph, he told Joseph, you're
Yeah.
going to Egypt.
yeah, that's right.
Yes, you're taking your family and everybody to Egypt. And that's where he went.
Yeah.
But, you never know.
No, that's right. And God can work it out. That's something else we talked about last time, right? God can take even the worst situation and make something good out of it. So there's a note it's kind of in the context of the Ruth narrative here on page 120 in your book. It's Malachi 3:16, and I'll just read it. It's written in the King James, but I'll just read it anyway. It says, the book of Ruth, through one family in Israel, views that faithful remnant throughout the nation, whom Malachi later described in these notable words. This is Malachi speaking about the faithful at this time when it was really desperate times. It says, then they that feared the Lord spake often one to another, and the Lord hearkened and heard it. And a book of remembrance was written before him for them that feared the Lord and that thought upon his name. And that's in Malachi 3:16. So Malachi, one of the prophets. So it's written at the same time. And I really liked that. I think that's something that God expects of us as the church, right? They that feared the Lord speak often to one another, and the Lord hears, the Lord hearkens and hears it. And then a book of remembrance is written for them that feared the Lord and that thought on his name. So it's an interesting, it's praise for people who stayed with it, right? In really dark times, they encouraged one another and they stayed with it. And it makes me think of the church because, it's when you really think about, I mean, my day every day isn't dark, right? I go about my life and it's fine, but the world is really dark. right now. I mean, it's really dark. You pay attention. And, you know, the church is this kind of little tiny group if you just count, right? But of course,
They tell me that they're in Lakeland all the time, and he's like, yeah, I never run into members of the church. I'm
oh,
just like, wow, that
that's
hurts.
funny. Yeah. I mean,
It hurts.
I do.
I just thought,
But yeah, I mean, you could not in Lakeland, right? Like when you
Yeah.
think of just the sheer numbers, and Lakeland is growing so fast. But you know, of course, when you're on the Lord's side, it doesn't matter, right? But it's important that we stay close together and speak often to one another, pray, because God is hearing us, right? This is a good lesson for us if you want to think about how the remnant behaved in those dark times. There's some lessons for us about how we might behave in this dark time as well. So, all right, moving on from Ruth, we talked a little bit last time about Eli and Samuel, the last two judges, and that Eli was a priest and a judge. Samuel was a priest and a prophet and a judge. But both of them had some difficulty in their families, right? They both had sons that were not faithful, and both of them, it's written right there on page 121 in 1 Samuel 3. It says, this is God talking about Eli's sons, that said his sons made themselves vile and he restrained them not, which is important, right? The problem. That was the problem. So Eli had some trouble parenting. We don't know anything about his wife or the rest of his family, but elsewhere it talks about Samuel's sons also sadly were also not faithful. So he had also two sons who did not do God's will. So both of them had some trouble at the end here of the judges. And then Samuel is actually one of my favorite characters. I don't know, do you call them characters? People. It's real, right? They're historical figures. One of my favorite historical figures is Samuel, who started out again with a faithful mother.
Yes.
And he was devoted to God by his mother in his young years, and was raised there in the temple with Eli. Samuel was the one that had to go tell Eli as a kid, he was young. And we know that because there's a little phrase, I think it's in chapter 2, 1 Samuel chapter 2, where it says his mother would always bring him, it says, a little coat. Not just a coat, like she knew how big he was. I like that. It's a mother's wood, right? So he was young and he was in the temple, he was sleeping, but he had been serving with Eli. He was the one that had to go tell Eli the prophecy that his sons would die and that he would die, and that, it was kind of his fault that his sons were not faithful. So from a very young age, he was sort of working in that capacity. And here he is older. We're going to turn over to 1 Samuel 12 as we move into chapter 11. So at the end of the period of the judges, here we have Samuel. Samuel is, knows Eli and is kind of traveling between Shiloh and the other town that I can't remember now. And as he's going back and forth, he knows people in the territory, and he knows Eli, and the people start to ask Samuel for what? We talked about this last time a little bit. A king. They want a king. And, really purely because they see other people with one. There's no need for a king because they have judges. And by the way, judges, we didn't talk about this last time, but judges started in Exodus 16, when Moses went to his father-in-law. Moses was judging the people, and his father-in-law was watching him and how tired he was. And he said, why don't you get some help? And his father-in-law suggested this method of, why don't you get faithful men and have them, by families, and then only the really big, hairy things can come to you and you can advise. And so he does that. And that sort of starts this idea of how the people were governed using judges. Now, the period of the judges was where it says God appointed the judges, not Moses. God appointed the judges. But here we are, they want a king. And, all the other nations have a king. How come I can't have a king? I can picture them, I don't know, this group of people. And so in 1 Samuel 12, we're going to read a little bit from verse 20 on. So in 1 Samuel 12, this is, there's a little conversation. It's actually, I think in chapter 8, when they start to talk to Samuel about wanting a king. And Samuel is really, really brokenhearted about this. Why do you, what do you need a king for? And God says to him, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. And so that doesn't really help Samuel. He's still pretty sad about it. Of course, God's plan was not for them to have a king, but he did grant them a king. And he said to Samuel, I'm going to give them a king and I'm going to show them how that goes. And so Samuel in 1 Samuel 12, and I'll ask somebody to read it. It's verse 20 following. So this chapter, 20 to the end. So this is what I want us to take from this passage. It was referenced in the book, but it's important to read it. So in this whole chapter, he's talking with the people of Israel, and he asks them, have I ever done anything wrong? Have I taken anything from you? Have I stolen? And they say, no, we're all good with you, right? Because he kind of wants to confirm that they're rejecting him. And then he tells them, you're actually rejecting God, and God's going to show you a sign. And so a storm comes through, and it was a dry season. A storm comes through right at the harvest. And it doesn't specifically say that it ruined the harvest, but it probably damaged the harvest. And after that, Samuel says, okay, you're going to get your king. But he gives them some warning. And in verse 20, through the end of the chapter, is his impassioned speech. And what I want us to listen to here is, what's the warning that he's giving them? What are the steps he needs them to take in order to stay with the Lord? And it's the reason I want to talk about it is this is another place where we can take these things. These are specific commandments that are also good for us to take to heart. So, all right, so whoever wants to read. Great, thank you.
And Samuel said unto the people, fear not, you have done all this wickedness. Yet turn not aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart. And turn you not aside, for then should you go after vain things, which cannot profit nor deliver, for they are vain. For the Lord will not forsake his people for his great name's sake, because it has pleased the Lord to make you his people. Moreover, as for me, God forbid that I should sin against the Lord in ceasing to pray for you, but I will teach you the good and the right way. Only fear the Lord and serve him in truth and with all your heart. For consider how great things he has done for you. But if you shall still do wickedness, you shall be consumed, both you and your king.
Okay, great, thank you. Boy, this is packed with things to talk about, right? Do not fear. You have done all this wickedness, right? He's telling them what you did was wrong, but serve the Lord. But do not turn aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart. So that's number one, right? Don't turn aside, serve the Lord with all your heart. So even after you make a ridiculous mistake, don't give up. Have you seen, there's a little meme going around where I think it's about losing weight or something. And it talks about, if you make a mistake, don't just let the mistake carry you down the path. And it's like somebody spilling a drop of water on their shirt, and then they're like, and then they dump the whole water on their shirt. Or it's like, well, I might as well go all the way. And the idea is, if you have that cookie, just get back on the wagon, right? You don't need to eat the whole bag of cookies.
You have to Weight Watchers.
Yeah, I think it is something about losing weight, but it's the same idea here, right? You've made this mistake. Yes, it was a grave error, and God has granted your wish, and you'll be swept away, you and your king. But stay with the Lord. You can still follow God, right? After you've made this mistake, come back and serve him with all your heart. Do not turn aside. And I like verse 21. If you either serve the Lord or you turn aside. What's the result of turning aside? What do you find when you turn aside? Verse 21.
You go after empty things which cannot profit or deliver.
for they are nothing. Think about that for a moment. I don't know that we always think about it in those terms, but if you're not following the Lord with all your heart, your option is you're going after vain things, empty things. There's nothing they can do for you. They can't profit you. They can't deliver you from anybody, or they're nothing, right? They're just created things. As opposed to if you follow God, you have everything, right? So those are sort of the options. I like that verse 21. 4, it says, the Lord will not, so this is another boy to ponder this one. For the Lord will not forsake his people for his great name's sake. In other words, not because you did anything good. I'm taking care of you because you're my people. And I cannot let, this is the Psalms are full of this. I cannot let, David's praying, please don't let other nations say, oh, God brought us out here and then left us, right? Rescue, take us all the way so that people will praise your name, right? And so that phrase, for his name's sake, that's something also just when you're lying in your bed late at night, right? Asking God to act not on our behalf, but on his own behalf, right? That's powerful. David prayed that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and Moses said words with those.
that's right. Yeah.
They used to argue about that. The Lord would tell him, go get your people, and the Lord and Moses
That's
tell
right.
him they were his people.
That's right.
Moses said, "Oh,"
That's
so I said, those are your people.
That's right. And Moses would say, well, you can't just leave us here because
Yeah.
people know, right? Like we talked about last time, like Rahab was watching the news, right?
When
People will
I
know.
hear that makes me realize that God is not untouched, unreachable. He's
Yeah.
it's like he knows exactly.
Yeah.
It's like talking to another friend. They know exactly what you want to say and how you want to say it or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, you have that conversation.
That's right. Yeah. And he does hearken, right? God hearkens and
Yeah.
hears you, right? That we
Mhm.
looked at Malachi. Yeah. So Samuel is telling them he's not going to forsake you because you're his people, because it's for his name's sake, because it has pleased the Lord to make you his people. So this, you can hear the undertone of this, right? You messed up.
Yeah.
You all messed up. But God is still faithful, and he is going to take care of you because you're his. And so that's important. I think God does not forsake his own. God watches his own. And then in 23, this is actually a response to a verse up above, where it says, 19. All the people said to Samuel, pray for your servants to the Lord your God, that we may not die, for we have added to all our sins the evil of asking for a king. And so this is, verse 23 is actually a response to that. And he says, moreover, as for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord in ceasing to pray for you. That's also an interesting way to phrase that, right? Do we pray for our brethren like that? You sin against the Lord
But
if you don't.
But the Lord asks us to pray for you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we got to take it seriously, right? Far be it from me to stop praying, he says. Like, wouldn't that for all of us?
Pray for God to have mercy on them.
That's right. Yeah. Far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord in ceasing to pray for you. But, he says, another great phrase here, but I will teach you the good and the right way. So did they know the good and the right way? Did they still need to be taught it?
Not that you do that, but they reminded.
I was just gonna say, cause we're so quick to forget.
Yeah. But you're thinking more what you want more so than
Right.
what something.
Right.
And sometimes we have a tendency to do that in reality.
Yeah.
We forget that it's not about us.
Yeah.
But what about the whole situation overall?
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah, it's always, you can always be learning, right? There's never, I mean, so there's so much to talk about there about teaching. There's a whole, and the paragraph in the book, by the way, is great about that. 126, it's the second full paragraph. I won't read it, but it starts with God's way must be taught. And it kind of walks through all the different ways, beautiful like the string of passages there about, Christianity is the way that you learn it is by teaching. It's not because you inherited it, or the place you were born. It's because you're taught it. And, even though this group of people knew and they had already been chastised and now told the right way, Samuel is going to continue to teach them. So we always need that reminder, even, and I say this to my boys all the time, like you can read and read and read and study. And it is the Bible it's a deep well. You can't get to the bottom. All your life you can study and you'll always find something different. You'll always find a way that it speaks to you. You'll always see something new. It's fresh all the time. So Samuel confirms that I'm always going to teach you the good and the right way. And then the reminder in 24, the corresponding 24 and 25, only fear the Lord and serve him in truth. Again, this phrase, with all your heart, for consider what great things he has done for you. And this is another, there's a whole list somewhere in the book about all the great things, but think about the great things that had happened to this group of people, right? They're in the Judges, even in Judges, where God is rescuing them and giving them leaders and helping them to wage war against their unfaithful neighbors. And they have a hard time struggling, but he's so gracious to them. They keep turning aside and he keeps saying, come back, come back. He's always faithful.
He told them to go in and do what he told them to do, take the land. They made their own choices.
Right.
They still didn't follow him.
Right.
But had they followed him, life would have been
Peace. Right? Peace.
I mean, you can have ups and downs with different things, but obedience.
Yeah. It actually brings peace, right? There's a lot to talk about just with what you just said. And I mean, let's end in 25 here, and then we'll talk about some of those things. In 25, it says, but if you still do wickedly, you shall be swept away, both you and your king. Right? You can almost hear the punctuation at the end of that. And their king would be. And so we'll talk about the choice of the king in just a moment. But last time we mentioned this idea that it's God's nature. All of God's actions are consistent with his nature. And at the top of page 126, go up to the top of 126. He makes a statement that I think we talked about last time, but I think it was after the recording because I listened to the recording and didn't hear this, but I think we talked about it. So I'll mention it very briefly just for the people online. So top of 126, that last sentence, it says, or I guess those two sentences. Every action of God is a manifestation of the nature of God and is therefore consistent with the holiness of God. God does not do what is right in the sense of conforming to a moral standard external to himself. What God does is right simply because he does it, right? Now, I just want to mention this. I don't want to take we could probably spend a whole hour on this concept. And we did mention it last time, so quickly. There is a classic philosophical discussion called the Euthyphro problem. Does this ring a bell? Did I mention? Yeah, we talked about it, but it wasn't on the recording. So just very briefly, this is Plato, the Greek philosopher in 400 BC, wrote a discourse between a student and a teacher. And the teacher poses this question to Socrates, being the teacher. The question is this. And by the way, he was not referring to the God of the Bible. He refers to the gods. Do the gods do their actions because they're right? Or are the actions right because the gods do them? So I know everybody's puzzled, right? So think about that. Is what God does he do things because they're the right things to do? Or are they the right things to do because it was God who did them? Now, we're not going to answer that question. I'll tell you, I sat through a class. My dad's using the class. And, at the end of the class, he asked me, well, which is it? What do you think? And I said, yes. Right? It's both. I think it's both. I think that what we know now about the God of the Bible that was not apparent to the person writing that text was that God is not just a list of characteristics. Right? He's not just, well, he's love and he's truth and he's justice. He is that, but he's also, we know, a person. He has his personhood, right? Which is very different from the Greek gods that they would talk about. And so I think, it's another thing to lie in bed and think about, right? The nature of God produces goodness because of the nature of God. And the things that the nature of God produces are good because they come from God, right? God in his sovereignty creates all of that for us. So we have one source for all of those things. So, all right, I'll mention that. If you want a book about that, I can share it. It's a classic philosophical problem. A little different from what's written in the book right here. All right, so let's see. Let's get into, there's a whole section here that is probably important to talk about, and that is he's laying the foundation again of God in his sovereignty has made laws for man that man has to obey, and he also in his love created laws for us that do us good. Right, that point is made in on page 127. Somebody read Deuteronomy 10:13.
To keep the commandment of the Lord and his statutes, which I command thee this day for thy good.
He commands things for our good. Right, yes.
I heard it said one time that God has never commanded anything that was bad for us, nor has he ever forbidden anything that was good for us.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And that makes
Yeah.
so much sense.
Yeah, he's not just a list of commands, right? Don't do this and don't do that. A lot of people think about religion that way, and that's not at all
It's
the God we know.
That
Yeah,
I'm
That's
not
right.
gonna be able to, can't do anything, can't do this, can't do
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
But the things he tells us not to do or
Yeah.
stay away from, how many people have you seen get in trouble
that's right.
and ruin their lives
Exactly.
by pursuing those things?
What a great segue to our three kings. Yes. So we at that point is made, there were several pages on that idea, that God is doing all of this for our good. And then we get into the three kings, and we're going to start with Saul. So Saul, the book says in page 128, even before Saul was anointed as the first king, inspiration signaled trouble ahead. He was unaware of Samuel and the nature of his life and work, and he had to be enlightened by his servants. We didn't even know who this prophet is. Samuel. Everybody knew Samuel, right? Samuel was the one they went to for the king. And here's Saul in this kind of, happy-go-lucky life he's leading. He doesn't even know who Samuel is. We start there. And then they meet, and it says he doesn't even realize that it's Samuel he's talking to. He has to be told that.
And he went to that soothsayer.
And then he goes to, so Saul's life is full of really bad decisions.
Yes.
And I made the note here, just selfishness versus submission, right? Man, he just didn't have it. He had moments, I really wanted to make this offering to you because God says to do an offering. Well, God said to wait for Samuel to do the offering. That's not what he said at all, right? And he kind of gets ahead of himself. And he's jealous of David. In fact, I made a list. I made a little table in my notes, right? Here's Saul. He's selfish. He's impatient. He's jealous. He's angry. He's disobedient. It just goes on and on. And so here's this king. Now, he was good looking. He was tall and handsome, right? He was a good king from the optics. He was the first king. Oh, he's a good one, right? But he led them down this path. They were constantly fighting the Philistines, constantly. David came and they fought, but he took care of it. David conquered the Philistines and expanded the kingdom. If you ever see a map of, kind of Saul's kingdom, and then it's David's kingdom, and then Solomon expanded it even further. But Saul was kind of fighting to keep his own. And, it says his heart was revealed early in his reign. So, that was where he wanted to offer sacrifices, and he was told to wait, and he just didn't. And then he said, I did wait, right? You can almost hear it's just like a petulant child. Yeah.
It makes you wonder why the Lord picked Saul to be the first king.
Yeah.
And I always think that the reason why is because if he had been a person to do the right thing from the beginning, And people would have been rejoiced to say, well, we didn't need God because
That's
we got a
right.
man who could do this.
Turn over to Hosea. This was referenced in the text. Hosea 13:11. Somebody read that verse. Look at how God felt about this whole thing.
I gave you a king in my anger, and I took him away in my wrath.
Okay. So when God appointed Saul, he wasn't really happy about it. But he gave him like, fine, I'm gonna give you a king. But Samuel tells them, right? It's you'll see what happens when you have a king. And when you have that leader, it's just tough for them. The whole nation suffered because of that. And that, the last piece, we gotta move faster through this. Whew. Saul, the last, what we're left with Saul is when he was told that the kingdom would be taken away from him. It actually was several years before David was actually appointed.
Exactly, yes.
And so he knew
Mhm.
he was what we call a lame duck, right? You're a leader, but you're not really like, I'm waiting for the next guy. And he really pursued David. He was going to kill him. I mean,
Instead of
over.
trying to redeem himself.
Yes. And so he knew, and the contrast just in those interactions where Saul was hunting him with his armies and David's hiding in a cave, right?
Mhm.
And then David stumbles upon Saul in a cave and could have taken him
Yeah.
by the throat. And what did he do? Remember that
He
one?
did because Saul was the king. And
That's
he would
right.
not
What did he do? What was
not give king.
he got close enough to cut a little piece off that robe, and then when Saul went out of the cave, he came behind him and said, "I have preserved your life today."
Yeah.
Right, and he would not. This says over and over and over. David would not put out his hand to the Lord's anointed, but Saul would. Saul knew that he was not the king anymore.
It's something interesting on page 129. In the last sentence in that second paragraph, but they Saul never dealt with his sin in this manner. Saul had a heart problem, and unlike David, his heart was not in the kinship with the heart of God.
That's right. Yeah. It's sad, right? David sinned too. Like they all sinned, all three kings. Nobody was perfect. But there was a difference between
David always repented when he was brought into
That he could thwart God's plan by killing.
It's a good question. I mean, what do you think? And
He
there was
was dumb, but
he was
wasn't
out of his
that dumb.
mind in some
He-
cases, right?
He knew God. He knew what he was capable
Yeah.
of.
Maybe.
But did he? His actions didn't show
Right.
that he
Maybe he
believed that there was a God.
It's like us. It's like, I'm sinning, but I'm like.
Yeah, no one will know.
Here, it's like nobody will know.
Yeah.
Yeah, Saul gives you Saul gives you the impression that once he was appointed king,
Yeah.
I'm all that on the bag of chips. I
right.
control
Versus that.
everything. Everything is under my command, and I can do what I want to do.
Yeah, he did what he wanted. Yeah. Yeah, it's
That work out for you.
exactly.
I didn't see the humility there with Saul. No humility at all.
No. And I mean, dies in battle. I mean, he just did not, his whole life was sort of a mess and was characterized by hunting down the next king of Israel, trying to kill him. And it said he was out of his mind. And when David was playing the harp
The
for
harp,
him, like
yeah.
bring David in to play the harp, and he threw his spear at him. So,
And then he
yeah.
turned his own son.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. Yes. No.
Jonathan.
It's just a mess. He was a mess. But God appointed him in his hatred. So maybe that had something to do with it. They didn't have a godly king.
This is what you want for your leader.
Right. Here's how it might go for you.
Go have at it.
But I think you're right, Ruby. I mean, if he had given them somebody, like if he had given them David first.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
They would have been like, see, it
Right.
worked out.
That's right.
That's all we need.
Yeah.
He can do just as good a job as you can.
Yep.
Sometimes God, and it says in the Bible, he turns us over to, it's like, fine, here,
Yeah.
have at it.
Get what you want. Here's
See
what
how
you want.
that does for you.
Right. Yeah.
And we gotta find out, like your kids, some of your kids gotta find out the hard way. There's always that one.
There is always one.
It's me. I'm that one.
Well, so let's turn to David quickly here. So, and I mean, there's so much to talk about even in the appointing of David, and just a note on the timeline, I was kind of doing the math. I like that stuff, so I'll mention it, even though it's probably not, no one else will like it, but the time of Joshua's conquest of Jericho was probably somewhere around 1900 BC. There was, so there's like 450 years of judges, and then 40 years, 40 years, 40 years of the kings. And we know that from Acts chapter 13, when Paul is talking through the history of Israel. It's kind of interesting to read. It gives all the timelines. So it doesn't say in the Old Testament specifically how long Saul served, but it does say in the New Testament. So it was each king about 40 years. And it's possible that Saul's 40 years also might have overlapped with Samuel a little bit. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. And David lived right around the year 1000. I mean, there's obviously a range, but that's kind of the anchor in my head. David was about 1000 BC. So, all right. So we have David being appointed king. And, right away, you can see David already, before he was appointed king, had some experience with being faithful to God, right? And he knew, for example, as he was a shepherd and he was delivered from the hand of a bear and a lion, that he credited that to God, right? Even as a young boy, or we don't really know how old he was, but, somewhere probably between 15 and 30. And he already was faithful, and he was, of course, writing Psalms as he was going here. So he had a very different approach. He did know who Samuel was. He did know that God could save them. And you remember, one of my favorite chapters in the Bible is when Saul's army is fighting the Philistines, and David comes to bring his brothers are fighting in the army, and he comes to bring them bread, and he hears the taunts of Goliath, and he says, yeah, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that taunts? It sends chills up my spine. Who dares to taunt the armies of the living God? This young kid, right? He was offended on God's behalf, and that characterized his whole life. Now, he messed up, and we're going to go quickly through his messing up, but he really brought the heart of penitence. And I wrote in my table, with all those horrible words about Saul, David, I wrote, gets it. He got it. He understood the sovereignty of God. He understood the idea of obedience. Now he messed up. We hear about him with when he's transporting the Ark of the Covenant, and things don't go well, right? Uzzah reaches out and touches it. That tribe was not to even be near the Ark, and let alone reach out and touch it. And David said at the end, well, we didn't do it after the due order. He gets it, right? He realizes, oh, we didn't follow the instructions. And so the consequences there. And I love this paragraph on page 131. What's the difference in staves and shoulders? In other words, sticks across your shoulder, the way you should carry the ark, and oxen and wagons? Well, it's the difference in obedience and disobedience, walking by faith and walking by feeling, submitting to God's will and succumbing to self-will, respecting divine authority and yielding to human desire, esteeming the teaching of grace, replacing it with the precepts of men, pleasing God or appeasing self, divine acceptance and blessing, and divine rejection and cursing. Those are, again, you have two options, right? There's no middle ground there. And so David understood that. Even though he messed up, he did understand that. And I won't go through there's another example given there in that section, but some of the words I wrote down for David's heart, he was full of forgiveness. He cared for his own family and for Saul's family, even the family of his enemy, right? When Saul and then Jonathan died, he cared for Mephibosheth in his own house, at his own table, right? Saul's last remaining relative cared for him. He was characterized by prayer. He repaid kindness rather than vengeance. And it goes on, right? There's all these characteristics of David. It's a great study, just looking at him as a character, as his character. And I'm going to mention quickly David's darkest hour. So there's a whole section here, which you should really read if you haven't, relative to his personal conduct. The darkest days in the life of David were those involving his adultery with Bathsheba, and his murder of Uriah. And, out of that is born, of course, the penitent Psalms and lots of grief in his life, right? He had consequences to that.
Yeah.
The child dies. They did have another son, but this was not his first wife. And so the book talks a lot about this, the sexual nature of man and the idea that the laws are good for you. You're meant to be with one person. And when we stray from that, it gets really sticky and messy, right? If you have multiple steps and so forth, and I know people do, but that's not an easy way to live your life, right? You've entered some complexity there that you're gonna have to navigate.
I think on page 133,
Yeah.
there's tampering with God's perfect work brings unexplainable injury.
Yeah,
To the very core of man's sexual nature.
that's right. Yep.
In other words, you can't do wrong and get by.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there have been scientific studies that I'll mention just quickly here about, especially in women, that women who have more than one sexual partner suffer psychologically because there's something about that physical connection that makes you feel a dependence on this other person. And so, you've heard it said a lot of different ways where you're kind of giving a piece of your soul away, and you are, right? And that's the plan, but not just women. That's also the plan for men. And so this whole section here, David sort of strayed. In fact, on page 135, such were some of the tragic results of David's departure from God's pattern for marriage and the home. So he also, in addition to his marriages and his adultery and murder, he also did not really correct his sons either, right? He had some favorites and he let them do things that he shouldn't have let them do. And they challenged even his throne. And then one situation at the end, he walks dejected, all in tatters, right? He's walking out of the gate of the city, and his son is there to take the kingdom from him. And he doesn't fight that. All right, he's tired at this point. But there, so he because of his physical relationships, he stumbled. And I mean, what a lesson for your young people, right?
David did good, but David was just a man.
Yeah, that's right.
Just a man, just a human being.
Yes. And again, you can see all the beautiful things God did, even though, but it does go back to, David had a pure desire to follow God. And when confronted with his sin, he didn't say, I didn't do that. He repented.
And that was his strongest.
That's right.
But think about it, that's what brought departure from the faith, and Henry VIII.
Right. Yes, all through history, right?
Yes, I mean.
Yes,
Which today, look at what's going on
no,
today.
right, yeah, what a mess,
Exactly.
right? What a
People
mess,
don't even know that this exists and that.
right? But there's a plan.
That there's a plan.
Yeah, and it's actually pretty easy if you just, I mean, it's not, I shouldn't say that. It's not easy. It's the cleanest path, right? It's the easiest path. It's not easy.
It comes with the desire to want to do better and learn how to and do what I need to do in order to be a better person.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Then you open the door for yourself to be taught and learn what God has to say.
Yeah.
And once you see that, then the choice is yours. You're going to follow God or continue on like you are. And like Dr. Phil say, how's that working for you?
That's right.
How's that working for you? Your choices.
That's right. And I mean, you can see David's choices even, I mean, especially in the Psalms, right? David has a true desire to follow God's way. Teach me your ways. And, that's his strength, is that he, even though he was weak and did some dumb things, that he did want to return to God. And God recognizes that, right? God is gracious to us. If we want to follow him, he makes a way for us to do that. So we're over time, but let's just mention quickly, the last king that we'll talk about is Solomon, David's son. And again, David sort of just gives the kingdom to him, right? He's done, and like, here, go ahead. And Solomon starts out strong, right? And we're not going to read the speech that he makes, but he does make a speech, and it's kind of similar to what Samuel said, like, we're going to be faithful. We're going to go back to the the word of the Lord. And he prays famously. God says, ask me what you will. And he prays for what?
Wisdom.
He prays
Be able
for
to
wisdom.
discern.
And, that's an interesting, also a great study when you think about your own prayers. What's the first thing you'd ask God for if you're given the chance, right? It was wisdom for Solomon. And so he was granted wisdom, and he was the wisest king ever to live. He also was the richest king, even today, was the richest king ever in history. He was able to build the temple on God's behalf. David wasn't allowed to do it. And so Solomon took that on and completed the temple, one of the great wonders of that time. However, Solomon had a little bit of a downfall.
Women.
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 That's what I wrote on my chart. Yes, but women.
Women.
And so, he ends up marrying, he has all of the wives and the concubines, he has way too many. And it says in chapter 11 of 1 Kings 10, but King Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites. We just talked about them, right? Edomites. Who's that? Esau.
Yeah.
The Zidonians and the Hittites. I don't know about the Zidonians, but the Hittites were enemies. And so here's, he's sort of following after his father's footsteps here. And he does not have a home life that is what it should be. And so he was swayed and, did all kinds of interesting things. He worshiped at different places, and he did not stay faithful. I think I said this last time, and I've since had this conversation with both my boys. Who you marry is a really big indicator of how faithful you're going to be, right? It's not impossible. It's not impossible to be faithful when you're not married to someone who's faithful.
More often
But
than not, it's gonna go the other
It
way.
influences you. It influences you, and you have to be the strong one. It's tough. So we talked about that last time. And so that happened to Solomon here. And so here we have this sort of bleak picture. So how did this go for them? Getting a king. It's not very good, right? It's not a very good scene, even though during this time we do have the kingdom expanding. God had blessed David with all kinds of, land and people, and Solomon with wealth and wisdom. And the temple got built, and, now there's a place where they can go. So there was some good that came out of it, but we don't really have a good picture here at the end. And we'll talk next time about the divided kingdom, which is even bleaker. There's a teaser for you for next time. The divided kingdom doesn't go very well either. And it's, even starts out with, bad advisors and people killing each other and jealousies, and they can't live together, so they separate. It goes on and on and on. So the king isn't really working.
But there was one good thing, just like with David, that came with Solomon. At some point when he got older, he came to his senses.
Right. Yes, that's right. You can see that in his later
Right,
writings.
exactly.
Yeah. He comes out with the Ecclesiastes 12 passage, right? The whole
Exactly.
duty of man, fear God and keep his commandments. That's what it all comes down to. I've seen everything.
I think the original doesn't have duty. It says
The
it's
whole
the
of man.
whole of
Yes,
man.
that's right.
It's not
This is
just
all
Yeah.
man.
this is it. This is all you
Yeah,
are.
I think the ESV says man's all, right? This is man's all, something like that. Somebody have the ESV? Yeah, I think you're right. What does it say? Sorry, Ecclesiastes 12.
13.
Yeah,
Yeah, I love
You man.
but that's this man, right? Who gets it at the end.
The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man.
Oh, and never mind. One of them, I think, says this is man's fault.
Yeah.
All right, well, we'll stop there. Next time, chapter 12. Probably 12 and 13 we'll do separately, and then we'll start to double up again. They're both pretty long. Thank you, everybody.